Well, thank you so much for the invitation. You flatter me when you say that I know everything about the EU situation on bioplastics, and I wish I did, but I'm getting there. There's a lot happening. I actually just joined European Bioplastics in June this year. Previously, I was working for the European Biotech Association for many years, so I was fortunate enough to work alongside European Bioplastics on a number of initiatives for quite some time, and it's really a pleasure to be fully immersed in the world of bioplastics now with European Bioplastics. As Boo said, it's great that we are all part of this network as well, the Bonn Europe network, so we get to exchange information and best practice on what's happening in the different countries, which is a great resource to have. So just a very quick introduction to European Bioplastics. The association has been around for 25 years, and it represents the interests of the bioplastics industry along the full length of the value chain. The overall aim is to build and strengthen a supportive network for bioplastics to thrive and develop across the EU. And it began back in 1993 with just 12 members, progressing on to 50 members in 2005. And today there's around 70 members, along with the Secretariat working on these objectives. So the vision and mission of the association, the vision is quite a simple one, but a very important one, which is for bioplastics to drive the evolution of plastics, contributing significantly to a sustainable society. The mission, likewise, is to align the bioplastics value chain and work in partnership with stakeholders towards a favourable landscape, enabling the bioplastics market to grow. So here's just a quick slide with a list of the members. As you'll see from this slide, many of them are small companies that you may either be part of or not have heard of at all, and some of them are larger companies and medium-sized companies that you will know much better. So a nice representation from small, large and medium-sized bioplastics actors, whether or not they happen to be in the renewable raw material green chemistry area, manufacturers, the distributors, the converters, the machinery and equipment, research and consulting, or industrial end users. So they're all represented there. So you probably will know a lot more about bioplastics than most other people. But just in case there's anybody on the call who is not so familiar with the sector, bioplastics basically enable a whole section or a whole range of activities and a whole range of production across different sectors. So you would start with agriculture and the primary producers producing the renewable raw materials that very often go into bioplastics, bio-based plastics specifically, but also the chemical industry and the plastics manufacturing industry, the converters, the brand owners, the retailers and the consumers will all increasingly be becoming familiar with bioplastics. And we have seen for many years that bioplastics are really crucial to the development of a strong bioeconomy in the EU. And there are a number of reasons for this. Partly it's because they're fundamental to growing markets and high value creation. They're important in the development of new green jobs. They strengthen rural development and encourage investment in biorefineries. They also have a high level of acceptance amongst consumers, and what we notice very often is that consumers are very open and receptive to thinking about selecting products that are made from bioplastics, and that's a trend that continues to grow. In addition, they have obvious climate protection benefits in terms of reducing GHG emissions and helping meet targets. And they do this by reducing the dependence on fossil carbon in many cases where they're relying on renewable raw materials as the basic starting point. And then there's also a really interesting benefit, which is the biodegradability and compostability and new options for recycling. So many interesting aspects there. A few quick figures for you on bioplastics. As you can see here, there's the overall figures that have been provided by Nova Institute and the Bio-Based Industries Consortia only a couple of weeks ago. And you can see from this that the bioeconomy is far from being a niche sector, and it represents in Europe 2.4 trillion euros. It also represents a significant number of jobs, 18.5 million at last count. And although you might look at this and see only a little sliver of these pies or donuts being represented as chemicals and plastics, you'll notice probably that the value of that small share is quite significant. So with the last available figures, we know that for bioplastics, they represented 100,000 people and a turnover of 19 billion euros in Europe. In terms of the production capacities, you can see here from this slide that by 2023 we expect 27% of production of bioplastics to be happening in Europe, and that is a growing trend on this continent. And most recently, only a couple of weeks ago, we saw an announcement from Total Corbion about them planning to have up and running by 2024 a new PLA plant, which will be based in France, creating jobs and growth there, which will also help reach this higher percentage of production in Europe. So bioplastics, as you probably know, can be found in pretty much every part of everyday life. We've all seen with COVID the importance of having plastics for a number of safety, health, security reasons. But prior to that, even, they were growing in the sectors of all kinds of different industries, including sports, toys, office equipment, shopping bags, electronics, consumer products. So there's a huge range and a huge scope there. So one of the challenges that we have very often in talking to the wider stakeholder community, and you will be familiar with this also, and talking to policymakers, is that, as you know, bioplastics are complex, and so they're not easy to explain. The lower level of knowledge often leads to misconceptions and can sometimes lead to a sort of a tendency to be exposed to misinformation. Also, there are some emotionally charged debates that have grown up around bioplastics, including food versus fuel. So the competition for land, for feedstock for bioplastics, which we know is a very insignificant amount of agricultural land, around I think 0.01% of agricultural land, which actually is contributing towards producing renewable raw materials for bioplastics. So plenty of misconceptions there, but there's also concerns about whether or not feedstock, which goes into the production of bioplastics, could be GMO. Marine pollution, as we've all seen recently, is another big preoccupation around anything to do with plastics. Then in addition, we have issues of greenwashing, because whilst in the EU we have proven standards for sustainability of bioplastics, there may be others, areas around the world where this is less of a concern, and where concerns could rise for Europe from that. And then a lot of myths and misconceptions still prevailing about the sector. So as you'll see from this slide, the part of the reason for the complexity around bioplastics is that they are not all bio-based. Some of them are. Some of them are fossil-based, but they're also biodegradable, compostable, sorry. So there is some complexity about what the different bioplastics are made of, about what their properties are, and that's important to communicate as well, so people are aware of the different types of bioplastics. So bio-based plastics, as we know, unlike conventional plastics, which come from fossil oil, come from renewable raw resources, and that has a huge advantage, obviously, of using renewable carbon from the air rather than fossil carbon, which is extracted from below ground. In terms of the different types of feedstock for bio-based plastics, we can have agro-based feedstocks, also lignocellulosic feedstocks, which would come primarily from wood, and also organic waste feedstocks, and an increasing amount of work going into looking at different sources of wastes and residues that can be used from a wide range of sectors for producing bioplastics. The obvious end-of-life options for bioplastics, which are extremely advantageous as well, is that they're not only mechanically recyclable, but they're also organically recyclable. So there's a really good circular closed loop that's possible for bioplastics. Overall, we're looking at a model where there's benefits to bioplastics, not just from the production, the way in which they're produced from the raw materials, which are very often renewable, but also the way that they can be used at the end of life, also in a circular way. So what are the political and regulatory opportunities and challenges for bioplastics in Europe at the moment? I think we could probably do an entire day on this topic alone. So I've condensed it into a few slides. But basically the starting point, what we need to look at is the Commission's new Green Deal, which is one of the central pillars of the new President Ursula von der Leyen's Commission, which came into its mandate around a year or so ago. So this is really all about making sure that the EU's economy becomes as sustainable as possible. It's very much part of the background to striving to be the first climate neutral continent in the world as well. And it's actually backed up by something called the Just Transition Mechanism, which is a €100 billion fund to enable this to happen in a way that leaves no one behind. And as you can see here, circled in red, there's some key parts of this EU Green Deal which have direct relation to bioplastics. So they would be achieving climate neutrality, transition to a circular economy, zero pollution for Europe, the farm to fork strategy, transformation of agricultural and rural areas, and towards a modernised and simplified CAP. Because as we know, bioplastics have important roles to play in agricultural productivity and sustainability. So a very important development that came through the recent EU Circular Economy package, which as we just saw is part of this EU Green Deal, is the linking of the bio-based economy with the circular economy. And this is something that was highlighted by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation initially, and we were very pleased to see this development, that the bio-based, the organic part of the economy is very clearly linked in people's minds and in policymakers' minds with the circular economy. So an important part of this circular economy package is the revision of the EU waste legislation, and this includes the Waste Framework Directive, which we abbreviate or acronymize as WFD. There's far too many acronyms in Brussels as it is, but sometimes it's a quicker way to get to the point. So this is also linked to the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive, known as the PPWD, and the Landfill Directive. And the second element of this, which is really important for bioplastics, is the closing the loop aspect of the circular economy. And this involves several different initiatives, including the plastic strategy and the revision of the fertilizers regulation. So we believe, and this is something that we are very vocal about in Brussels and indeed across the member states and the other countries involved in rolling out these pieces of legislation, that bioplastics really are essential to the new plastics economy. And the reasons for this is that they link the bioeconomy and the circular economy. They treat waste as a valuable resource. They cut resource use, reduce waste, enable true circularity by setting clear methodologies and standards. They address all stages of the product life cycle, including product design and efficient use of feedstock and waste treatment. There's also aspects of feedstock from renewable resources which help decouple plastic production from fossil feedstocks and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Then compostability is a very important element that helps bioplastics return nutrients to the soil, and many good examples of best practice of this, particularly in Italy with the collection of municipal organic waste, which is recycled into high value compost. And then increasing use of secondary raw materials, enabling separate collection of waste and improved waste treatment options to reduce and eventually phase out landfill for recyclable materials. And there are targets now for the collection of organic waste by the end of 2023 from households, so that these are not going into landfill anymore and that they're not producing methane as a result that goes into the atmosphere and contributes to the greenhouse gas effects. So we're calling for an introduction of concrete provisions in the Waste Framework Directive that stimulate the bioeconomy and further use of responsibly sourced renewable raw materials. We're also calling for the setting of indicative targets for the use of sustainably sourced renewable raw materials in packaging. As we know, all of us, the increase in online shopping means that packaging is increasing regularly, and this needs to be made sure that it's not only reduced as much as possible, but also that it's where it is used, it's used in a sustainable way and made from sustainable materials. We're also calling for an increase of waste management efficiency by promoting the separate collection of bio-waste for organic recycling, and that the member states exclude mechanical and organic recycling waste from landfills. The creation of a level playing field for bio-based materials versus vis-à-vis the heavy subsidized conventional material sector is another aspect, and the securing of supply of renewable feedstock for all branches of the bioeconomy. So just quickly to focus in for a second on the EU Waste Framework Directive, this is another, as mentioned before, this is a really key piece of legislation for bioplastics. The revision of the EU Waste Framework Directive, which is currently ongoing, is aiming to increase the quality and quantity of recycling, including relevant changes for bioplastics. And these are about establishing a definition of bio-waste. It's very important that this is part of the essential requirements of the Packaging Waste Directive. Adapting the definition of recycling to include organic recycling. Unfortunately, occasionally we see a trend where mechanical recycling is referred to almost exclusively in some areas, and that there isn't a good understanding yet of the fact that organic recycling plays a really important part in this framework. The mandatory collection of bio-waste is a very important aspect as well, and the rationale for this is that biodegradable and compostable plastics, such as food packaging or bio-waste, can help collect more bio-waste in households and therefore divert this from landfills and make it into a really valuable source of raw material. So coming to the end now, this is an overview. This is the kind of thing that we're looking at very often, not perhaps the most fascinating of slides, but it's one way of getting onto one slide, a little summary of what's going on. So we have as our backdrop the EU Green Deal, as I mentioned. We also have an industrial strategy, and within the EU Green Deal, the Circular Economy Action Plan, the Farm to Fork strategy. There is, as many of you know, the Single-Use Plastics Directive guidelines, which are still being elaborated on now. Then we have the revision of the Packaging Waste Directive, proposal for green claims. So there's other initiatives that are going on at EU level about substantiating green claims for products, which will also be important. And later on in 2021, much more work going on the EU framework for biodegradable and bio-based plastics. We at European Bioplastics would like this to be based on sound science and the best research that's available, outlining and highlighting the benefits of bioplastics and enabling innovation in this sector, which is really crucial. So a quick summary of the policy drivers and gaps. In terms of the policy initiatives, we can see that the circular economy package should represent a good driver for bioplastics, EU waste legislation as well, the strategy on plastics, the fertilizers regulation, the EU bioeconomy strategy, and national initiatives that are really providing examples of best practice of how bioplastics can contribute to the EU's overall goals on sustainability and Green Deal. Where there are gaps, though, there's still gaps where it comes to extended producer responsibility rules for recycling and bio-based content in packaging and products. On carbon taxation, there's also gaps there. Green public procurement, we know, is very effective in getting emerging markets such as bioplastics off the ground, and we could do with a more concerted effort to ensure that green public procurement takes bioplastics into consideration. And then support for compostable materials in specific applications and an implementation and increasing efficiency of waste management infrastructure across the EU, very important also. So many reasons to advocate and lobby on bioplastics in Europe for all the benefits that they represent. These are environmental, renewable, functional in terms of new functionalities, innovation, new applications, enhanced performance, end of life, and of course the societal dimension as well. And that's the way that we always like to look at sustainability in whole. It's not just environmental, which is obviously very important, but also economic and societal, and bioplastics have a lot to offer there. So for now, I will end my presentation. Thank you.